All right, so we're going to jump into this first panel. And I think just to share with the room, I mentioned before that my background is in safety net healthcare. I worked for, before joining Eco America last year, I worked for 14 years in local safety net healthcare programs here in the DC area. And it really was seeing those climate impacts start to accrue, start to combine with other disparities and issues of health equity that drove me into this role, into focusing on climate change, whether that is outdoor workers in a heat wave suffering, or people with diabetes during power outages, or uninsured children who are food insecure and don't qualify, all of whom have came to this into this region due to a food security crisis in Central America. So seeing those connections about how climate change was directly driving on the health equity issues that I was most focused on really brought me here. And this panel is focused on how solve the climate solutions, taking action on climate, addressing climate impacts, also address those equity solutions. It isn't just a negative feedback loop, although that does exist. There also is the positive feedback loop that we can take action, address those structural and social barriers and inequities, and help to close those disparities. So we are going to be joined by moderating this panel is Dr. Georges Benjamin, the Executive Director of the American Public Health Association. Incredible resume, incredible background. The full resume is in the panel. We're so proud that he's been on the board of Eco America for 7 years. And so thank you so much, Dr. Benjamin. Joining him on stage will be Dr. Natasha DeJarnett, the Deputy Director of Environmental Justice Data at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and Jacqui Patterson, the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline justice leadership. So thank you so much. Please come on up to the stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. You know, it's a real honor for me to be here. I mean, I get to be here with these two incredible women who are just real rock stars in this area. And, you know, the whole issue around equity, equity doesn't happen, and inequities don't happen just by chance. Inequities happen because we construct systems that way. And to correct those systems, we have to do proactive things. So today we're going to have a conversation with our two panelists here to talk a bit about how best to be really proactive in addressing these actions. So what I'm going to actually ask each one of them to kind of just make some opening remarks. I know Natasha has a presentation, and then Jacqui, you can make some opening remarks, and then we'll have a conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. I am absolutely thrilled and honored to be here. And I have a few slides to share with you. Let me go back. Apologies. Have a few slides to share with you, but really deeply honored. Thank you to Eco America and Climate for Health for the opportunity to be here. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you about the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. I want to acknowledge CEQ's Environmental Justice Team under the leadership of Dr. Jalon White-Newsome, and of course, CEQ Chair Brenda Mallory. And I also want to acknowledge the U.S. Digital Service that contributed extensively to the development of the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. But what I will say is that the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool is a key step in delivering on the administration's environmental justice commitments, as well as its Justice 40 goals. So I'm excited to share about version 1.0 of the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, also known as the CJUST. Version 1.0 was released in November of 2022, and federal agencies are using this tool to identify disadvantaged communities for the purposes of the Justice 40 initiative. And version 1.0 responds to extensive feedback that was received on the beta version of the tool. So President Biden signed Executive Order 14008 on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad during his first week in office. And this executive order charged the Council on Environmental Quality with creating a geospatial climate and economic justice screening tool and publishing interactive maps highlighting disadvantaged communities. Executive Order 14008 also created the Justice 40 initiative. So the Biden-Harris administration's Justice 40 initiative seeks to deliver 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments to disadvantaged communities that have been marginalized and overburdened by pollution and underinvestment in the areas that are shown on this slide. The Justice 40 initiative is a series of changes by agencies. It's not a one-time investment and it's not a single pot of money, but it applies to certain existing programs as well as certain new programs, including the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the American Rescue Plan. For the CJIS methodology, communities are considered disadvantaged if they are in census tracts that meet the threshold for at least one of the tool's categories of burden. In addition, communities are also considered disadvantaged if they're on the lands of federally recognized tribes. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. In the CJIS tools, burdens are categorized according to the way that they're described in the Justice 40 initiative, as well as how President Biden describes them in Executive Order 14008. And that includes the areas of climate change, energy, transportation, housing, legacy pollution, waste and wastewater, health, and workforce development. And a community is highlighted as disadvantaged on the CJIS map if it's in a census tract that is at or above the threshold for one of the burden indicators and at or above the associated socioeconomic burden. Overall, there are about 27,000 tracts that are identified as disadvantaged in version 1.0 of the CJIS. And I'll share an example of the climate change burden and the health burden, but I encourage you to visit the CJIS website under the data and methodology page to see the methodology along with documentation of the data sets that are used for each of the categories. But you can see them summarized here and on the following slide. So for the climate change burden category, communities are identified as disadvantaged if they're in census tracts that are at or above the 90th percentile for expected building, agriculture, or population loss rate, or projected flood or wildfire risk, and are identified as low income. And here are those remaining burden categories. So for health, communities are identified as disadvantaged if they're at or above the 90th percentile for asthma, diabetes, heart disease, and low life expectancy, and are low income. And then I'll also note that a census tract that is completely surrounded by disadvantaged tracts and meets an adjusted low income level is also considered disadvantaged as well. So the CJIS is designed to help federal agencies identify disadvantaged communities for the purposes of the Justice 40 initiative and other programs where a statute directs resources to disadvantaged communities. Many agencies are already taking actions, such as issuing notice of funding opportunities that specify the use of the CJIS to identify disadvantaged communities. So if you go to grants.gov and click on search grants, you'll find many notice of funding opportunities or funding opportunity announcements that include the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. As of early September, around September 11th actually, a quick search revealed that there were just about 70 posted or open grant opportunities available. Some examples include the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund programs, including their Solar for All program, and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. Another example that I think may be of interest to the group is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, their National Integrated Health Information Systems awards for fiscal year 2023. And this was posted in July of 2023. So to wrap things up, the guidance and instructions provide direction to federal agencies on using the CGIS and how to use the CGIS. These are publicly available and accessible on our website. And you can see the website here, screeningtool.geoplatform.gov. And you can also direct any questions that you have about the CGIS to screeningtool, one word, _support@omb.eop.gov. And I thank you for your attention thus far and certainly look forward to our panel discussion.
Thank you. It's Patterson.
Thank you. So I am going to briefly tell you a kind of a tale of three people in three communities, and also talk about this notion of redefining a triple bottom line. So first person I'll tell you about, in 2016, when I was at the NAACP, we had a energy justice training certification program. And so we gathered folks together and we were talking about what it means to build energy justice. And this person who was in the training stood up, her name was Amy, and she said, you know, I had a situation where my electricity was being shut off by, she lived in Phoenix. And when I visited Phoenix, I have been to the equator multiple times, but I have never been as hot as when I walked off the plane in Phoenix. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. I'm thinking when I stepped out of there that maybe it was like exhaust from the buses or whatever. Then I realized it was just the air. Like it was just so hot. But so Amy Mays is her name. She talked about how her electricity had been cut off multiple times and how she just kept, you know, for non-payment, and she just kept getting it turned back on. But every time she had it turned back on, they imposed these not only like the reconnection fees, but also made her pay a higher and higher deposit. So it's like you're already unable to pay your bills, and they're trying to cover their own risk by putting in this deposit, but it makes it even harder for you to get back into the system and maintain. And so she just kept getting bounced off of the system because she couldn't afford all of this. And so eventually she decided, okay, I'm just going to start, I'm going to get a cooler and to keep all my cold stuff in this cooler, buy ice every day. And the money that I would have paid towards my electricity bill, I'm just going to save it up and save it up. And every month she would buy a solar panel. And then the next month she would buy, you know, another few months she would buy another solar panel until she had enough of an array. And she was an electrician herself. So she got up on her own roof and installed those solar panels on her roof. And now she wrote an article after that. We worked with her to write this article that said, utility greed locked me out of the grid, but God-given sun set me free, or something like that. So that is a story of what it looks like when people have self-determination, when people really are able to identify alternatives. And so it's better for her and better for the planet. Another person who was in that same training, her name was Joanne Hardesty. And at that point, she was the president of the NAACP Portland branch. And she was, you know, just learning about energy justice. And she took that information that she learned from the certification program back to Portland and started to work with the community on developing these principles, based on the principles that we had shared there, principles of environmental justice for Portland. Those principles then went into this community process that they were doing to develop a model policy called the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And they were successful in developing the Portland Clean Energy Fund, passing the Portland Clean Energy Fund. It was completely community designed, community led. And now it is live and thriving. Anyone here from Portland or Oregon by chance? Oh, okay, good. So you know all about it. So it was a fantastic initiative. And Joanne Hardesty went on from being, you know, as part of that activism, started to really gain notoriety, really began to be seen as a key leader in her community. And she ended up winning an election to be on city council. So now she has moved up through the ranks into local leadership. So a third story in person I want to tell you about is Mr. Chambers in a community called Sand Branch, Texas. Sand Branch, Texas is right outside of Dallas, Texas. And as we all know, Dallas is one of the richest cities in the world. Sand Branch is a freedman settlement. It was It was founded by 11 people who were emancipated from enslavement in Louisiana, who were looking for land, and they found this land that they settled on in Texas. Since 1980s, the community has not had running water. They had some kind of contamination of their well water, and they weren't able to get it remediated, and they literally have been living off of donated bottles of water ever since then. They use those 16.9-ounce bottles of water for their cleaning, for their cooking, for their bathing. I mean, literally everything we need a drop of water for. They use those 16.9-ounce bottles of water. In addition, it's an unincorporated area, and they don't have trash pickup. So those bottles and bottles of water go into those like steel drums, and along with all their other household waste, and it's burned every day, creating again, another public health crisis in terms of the air quality of having these mini incinerators in your backyard every day. They don't have stormwater drainage or any kind of sanitary system, and it's really been quite devastating there. I first met Mr. Chambers when we were delivering water to the community of Sand Branch and trying to have conversation. And then we started to deliver meals as well. And he lived in this home that really reminded me of a home that you would see from, I don't know whether there's been any upgrades to the structure, certainly his home, since when they founded the community back in the late 1800s. And so he was a community member who also didn't, like so many other community members, didn't have much faith that there was ever going to be a change. After 40 years of not having water, there really wasn't much faith. We started to, as I said, deliver meals, deliver water, started to have conversations. Slowly, after canvassing the community, we started to have town hall meetings where we just kind of facilitated community conversations. Fast forward to today, now all of the community members that want one have a hydro panel system where they use atmospheric water generation to get water for the community. So that was exciting. Mr. Chambers had started to come out to the town hall meetings. At first he wasn't really coming, then he started to come out. And also fast forward to today, he had decided he also wanted to get hydro panels. He was very resistant about the hydro panels at first. I mean, he's an much older gentleman, and was kind of skeptical about it all. But he finally decided he wanted to have them. Like I said, he started to come out to the town hall meetings. In the recent heat wave that happened, Mr. Chambers, whose home didn't have any ventilation or AC or anything like that, was unfortunately found in his home, passed away from heat stroke. And so I tell these three stories to talk about like what's possible, but also to talk about what's at stake here and now, and to talk about, people talk about the false urgency of white supremacy, but there's a real urgency of the material conditions that people are living in right now. And so when we think about the kind of triple bottom line of taking action on climate, we think of it as the urgency to take action on climate now because of, as we talked about, the 9 planetary boundaries and climate being one of them. The triple bottom line of immediately addressing the material conditions of the communities for whom it's too late. For communities in Libya, it's too late. For people in Sand Branch, Mr. Chambers, it's too late, and we can't continue to have this acceptable losses while we plod our way along. And then the third piece is actually democracy. The community of Sand Branch hasn't changed over these years since emancipation, whether it's been Ford or Carter or Reagan or Clinton or the Obama or Trump, and even now with President Biden. There's been no material change whatsoever in the community of Sand Branch until the actions that we started to take there. But once the community was completely not only disenfranchised by the world, but they didn't see the world as a place where it was worth engaging in. They didn't see the democracy of something as something that they were a part of. But now, as they start to have these material conditions met, they are a part of the climate justice movement. They are a part of seeing seeing the value of going out and voting and seeing some material conditions change for them and part of this bigger we of our society. So I kind of lay all that out to say that there are that our strategy needs to be kind of really looking at the material conditions that exist now, how we can address climate change, and how we can actually build a democracy. We talk about the money that we're spending now around addressing climate change and so forth. We're also spending billions of dollars in fossil fuel subsidies. We are actually financing climate change actively and at the level of billions of dollars and trillions of dollars around the world. So we really need to get real about what's going on, both in terms of the planet, but also in terms of the people who are the furthest away from this notion of a rising tide lifting all boats when you have communities that aren't in boats at all. So those would be my opening remarks to have us reflect on a little bit. Thank you.
And Jacqui, thank you for those really touching remarks. So, you know, our format today is to be solution oriented. And I'm going to talk to Dr. DeJarnett and ask you a bit. You know, you shared information about a helpful tool that, you know, the agencies are using to identify disadvantaged communities. Can you also share some ways the tool can be used locally?
Absolutely. And thanks for this question. So, as you said, federal agencies are using this tool to identify communities that will benefit from the Justice 40 initiative, which seeks to deliver 40% of the resources of climate, clean energy, and other related investments to disadvantaged communities. So the tool provides a single definition of disadvantaged communities to be used across the whole federal government. And importantly, this should be used in resource allocation, particularly when it comes to the Justice 40 initiative. So the CJUST is to be the primary tool for federal agencies for the purposes of Justice 40 to direct resources to disadvantaged communities. But within the set of communities that are identified as disadvantaged through the CJUST, other tools can then be used to further prioritize among these communities. And so what we instruct agencies to do is to start with the CJUST to identify disadvantaged communities, and then agencies have the ability to prioritize further within communities, maybe through their other federal tools or other state or local tools or other data. To further identify and further prioritize among the list of disadvantaged communities. And in addition, other tools may be able to not only further define disadvantaged communities, but to also understand the benefits, how communities may benefit from said resources or burdens may be reduced. But in general, the CJUST is a publicly available tool that can be used by federal agencies as well as non-federal agencies, including state and local governments, community organizations, et cetera. Businesses or community groups can use the CJUST in applying for funds that are related to the Justice 40 initiative, and can also use this to see if what they're applying for or the programs that they're proposing to bring will reach disadvantaged communities or will benefit disadvantaged communities. And then communities can also use this tool to find out if they live in a disadvantaged communities or if they work in a disadvantaged community that are slated to receive the benefits of the Justice 40 initiative. But ultimately, community members, us, the general public, are able to use this tool to identify the different burdens that are facing a community. So I think that though this is a federal tool for federal agencies to use in resource allocation, there are also many ways that all of us are able to benefit from the information that is provided in the CJUST. Thank you for this question.
How's it different from other environmental justice tools?
Oh, awesome. Appreciate you asking this. We are in a really exciting time where there are a number of federal environmental justice tools. There is a significant amount of environmental justice data that is able to be visualized through a number of different tools, complementary tools across the federal government. So the CJIS is different from the other tools because it is intended to help agencies to identify disadvantaged communities for the purposes of the Justice 40 initiative and the Justice 40 covered programs, and should be used in the purposes of resource allocation. Many other tools may focus on other types of burdens that are particular to an agency or organization's areas of focus, and they may use them as also as purposes that are directed by law. But the CJIS is used government-wide. It is used specifically for resource allocation, but it promotes consistency. It promotes outreach and engagement across the federal government, and communities are able to use this to better understand if they're prioritized for benefits across the swath of federal government programs. So while agencies often need the details of their own tools to serve their programmatic purposes, we are seeing that some agencies are incorporating the CJIS into their tools. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, they have a climate mapping for resilience and adaptation tool. And so this notes the key areas of their programmatic focus, but it also has loaded a data layer connected to the CJIS. So the CJIS data is also imported in there so that you can see that along with their programmatic focus areas. So it is a exciting time that there is an unfortunate abundance of environmental justice data, but also that a lot of agencies and groups are trying to visualize environmental justice in this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Jacqui, obviously this is a tool that you can use with your communities. And I tell you what I thought I heard. I heard really three scenarios here, three of those stories you told, but which I think are quite compelling. One, the first one around energy and justice, recognizing that lower income individuals spend a higher portion of their income on energy than more well-to-do individuals. You told us a little bit about a community that had their own funding solution, meaning they took the bull by the horn, as they said, and decided they're going to figure out how to pay for stuff to try to change their situation. And then another about a community that actually addressed something which I think is a real significant problem, which I'm getting to, that I would like you to talk a little bit about, is this real challenge we're having in our nation around this access, growing access disparity to water as a fundamental core thing. I mean, public health, we made our bones, as I said, on sanitation. That's one of the great public health victories in our country, was recognizing the critical relationship between the environment from a sanitary perspective and health. And yet people don't really even have the fundamental access to water in so many of our communities. And unless it's the Flint story or the Jackson, Mississippi story, which got into the media, there are far more communities that are having these challenges. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think you've already laid it out perfectly. There are so many communities that have the same challenge, whether it's communities that have their water contaminated through the antiquated water infrastructure system. So definitely many more communities that have issues around lead in the water. Communities that are on well water and that they have contamination from runoff and other things that happen that impact the water. Then there's also issues around privatization of water that has made, when you have something that people need for life that now is being used for profit, then the extent to which people can afford and access is also a problem. So across the country, there are uncountable number of people in this circumstance. I don't know, but So that's definitely the water situation, and we're actually coming out with a report around that's an audit of the water equity across the country and the water systems across the country, and telling kind of community level stories, but also pointing to, as we say, solutions in terms of ensuring that, I mean, because we know that the world is 2/3 water, and it's really how, again, how we are treating our environment that's causing the problem. So, yeah.
Well, no, I thank you about that. When is that report process about going to be due?
I would say in the new year, January, it'll be done.
Okay, we'll be
Yeah.
looking for that report.
Sure.
That's an important issue, because I know that, as you know, the Biden administration has a program now to replace the lead lines, the water lines in our communities, and to address that in a very important way. And I'm really proud that process is going on. APHA has been part of the lead line coalition that's been advocating for that kind of thing. And I think that that's certainly important, but that's replacing pipes where you have pipes. And so many of our communities don't have that. I'd like to hear a little bit more, Jacqui, about this issue around the community-led funding solutions, because at the end of the day, it's you still need to have the resources, and community controlling those resources is just so important.
Yeah, no, and there's so many examples, growing number of examples of communities that are really basing their economies on regeneration. And so having regenerative economies, whether it's local food work. I don't know if folks are following on the list for the Heinz Environmental Award, but just today it was announced that Leah Penniman from Soul Fire Farm was one of the winners of the Heinz Award this year. And that work around Soul Fire Farm is really lifting up models around how we can grow our own food locally. I mean, during the pandemic, I had my little balcony garden, and I grew all the ingredients for bruschetta, which I was very excited about. And so these are things that we can actually do. And so more communities are starting to be self-sufficient around food. Communities are starting to be self-sufficient around energy. And some communities are combining it all. Places like Push Buffalo or Push are facilitating, which is People United for Sustainable Housing, are really advancing models for people to be able to have self-sufficient communities. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance has amazing models on how people can not only generate the commons, food, water, energy from locally and through regenerative processes, but also can become maker communities where they're starting to do local manufacturing. Really think having zero waste communities where everything is we have durable goods, and where there is recycling of goods. And so there are communities, there's an intentional communities movement where you see a lot of great models of how we can have these holistic, sustainable communities. There's communities like what's it called? Highland Park, Michigan, where they have a project called Solidarity. After their electricity was shut off by DTE for their streetlights, they also went out and decided, to raise funds until now they have a whole solar streetlight system based on community coming together and generating their own resources and then generating their own energy. And so I could name so many examples of places that are doing this. Spartansburg, South Carolina, people have heard about Harold Mitchell's work with Regenesis, that they're also not only doing work around, local food, local housing ownership, but also really raising kids to understand everything from robotics to other kind of STEM-related topics.
Well, listen, I want to thank you. We could do this conversation absolutely all day. So I just want to thank Dr. Natasha DeJarnett from the White House, and my good friend, Jacqui Patterson from the Hood. And I thank you both.
Thank you.